Hey viewers, my name is Cara. I'm your host for Tuesdays here on the Pagan Perspective. And first of all, I'd like to say happy June, happy Pride Month. It's Pride Month here in the United States. I don't know if it also is internationally, but here in the United States, June is LGBTQ plus Pride Month. And so happy Pride Month to you. This week, we are going to be talking about permaculture and our environments. The text of the questions will be in the description as always, but I will read them to you now as well. So it's two main topics. Each of them is multi-part questions, multiple questions. The first one is, are you familiar with permaculture and does it influence your beliefs? The second one is, what ecosystems and climate do you live in? How does this influence your path? And how might someone incorporate their local environment into their practice? So before I get into this, I do want to apologize in advance or in retrospect for any noise that you may have already been hearing in the background of this video and any noise that you will continue to hear throughout the video. I've actually tried recording this video a few different times throughout the day, and no matter what, there's noise. Because if it's light outside, right now it's in the spring, kind of moving into summer weather, it's warm outside, so everyone is constantly outside, mowing their lawns, building things, gardening, doing any number of things, kids playing outside, screaming. So right now it sounds like we have someone a few houses down working on something outside, and that's the noise that we have in the background today. There might also be like my neighbor's dog barking, things like that. So I've just come to accept that that's just how it's gonna be. If I want to record on my porch and have nice natural lighting, that's just what it is. So first thing here, talking about permaculture. Are you familiar with permaculture? Does it influence your beliefs? I am not super familiar with permaculture. I'm familiar with the concept, and I know that Starhawk, who is someone whose work I am reading a lot of this year. I'm trying to read all of the things that Starhawk has ever published, full books anyway, not every single essay and blog post, but the books this year that I have not previously read. And I know that Starhawk today is very involved in permaculture and is involved in training people in permaculture design and learning these systems and the principles of design leading to sustainable ecosystems. And so permaculture is something that has to do with ecology, it has to do with land management and land use, it has to do with agriculture. It's essentially, in my own words, again, not being by any means an expert at it, I wouldn't even call myself well-versed in it. I am just vaguely aware of it, and I'm learning a little bit more over time. I would describe it as an environmental practice or system, way of designing your gardens, your landscaping, a way of working with the natural ecosystems in a given area, working with the systems that are already there, the way that certain plants and animals naturally work together to create a vibrant and healthy ecosystem. And there are some core tenets and principles of what we could now call a movement, the permaculture movement, that I would like to share with you, because this is something that's just available. I'll put some links in the description as usual. But this is just something that's listed right on the Wikipedia page about permaculture. And I think these are really interesting things. So first, the three core tenets of permaculture as listed on the article are, firstly, care for the earth. It's the first one because the idea is that without the earth and her resources and all of the living beings on the planet, we would not be able to exist the way that we do. There would be nothing for humanity to sustain ourselves or concern ourselves with in any way, right? So the first thing is care for the earth, followed by the second thing being care for the people. So once we have cared for the planet, we care for the earth. That is the primary thing, because without it, we would be nothing. We would have nothing. It wouldn't even matter. So then we come second. And then the third thing is called fair share. And as they say it here, which I think is really the best way to put it, I can't really put it a better way, so I'll just quote it for you. They say, by governing our own needs, let's start over. By governing our own needs, we can set resources aside to further the above principles: care for the earth, care for the people. This includes returning waste back into the system to recycle into usefulness. This third ethic is referred to as fair share, which reflects that each of us should take no more than what we need before we reinvest the surplus. So I like this because this is a concept that we also talk about in magic when we talk about energy work, and when we're raising energy towards a specific goal. You may, if you've ever worked with groups of people, you may have heard people talk about, now, take the energy that you need from this experience and any excess energy that we have that might be, if you've raised a lot of energy and then, you don't want to walk away with just energy way up here, out of the camera frame, way beyond your normal operating level of like high energy, super hyper, whatever. So we take what we need, we use what we need toward manifesting our goal, and then any extra energy that we've manifested, we ground, and we give it back to the earth. It's a very similar principle, only this is talking about literally. We only take what we absolutely need to sustain ourselves and the environment, and then, we only take exactly what we need to sustain ourselves, and then we recycle the rest of it back into sustaining the environment and sustaining that ongoing system. So, those are the 3 core tenets of permaculture, as it says here on the Wikipedia page. And the 12 design principles, as determined or articulated, it says here, by David Holmgren in the book Permaculture, Principles and Pathways Beyond Sustainability. The 12 design principles are as follows, and I want to read these to you as well because some of these, as you read them, it's very clear that it's specifically talking about environmental design and systems of healthy ecosystems and things like that. So they will very much speak to you of like, oh, this is about nature, this is about growing crops, this is about, things like that. Whereas other ones can also clearly be seen to apply to human nature as a whole and to society and our culture. So I want to read these to you. The first one is observe and interact. Second, catch and store energy. Third, obtain a yield. 4, apply self-regulation and accept feedback. 5, use and value renewable resources and services. 6, produce no waste. 7, design from patterns to details. 8, integrate rather than separate. 9 is use small and slow solutions. 10, use and value diversity. 11, use edges and value the marginal. And 12 is creatively use and respond to change. So a lot of those, to me, really speak to magical principles as well. And that, I think, is because my magic is very much concerned with being connected to our environment and being connected to our lives as human beings as well, and how I believe that society best functions, how we treat each other, how we treat other beings on this planet, how we treat the planet itself or herself. So, everything from even number 1, observe and interact. It's about observing our environment, seeing how the things around us work, seeing how they work together with each other, and utilizing that information as it is, the way that the system is already functioning, instead of going against the grain or working against the current, right? Both sayings that we have in our culture that are very much about nature in the long run, because we're talking about going with the flow of the current versus going against the current. and going against the grain versus going with the grain. These are both sayings that we get from nature and how we work with and interact with it. To things like apply self-regulation and accept feedback. That's such good advice for a human community as well. Produce no waste. Design from patterns to details. Look at the larger pattern first and step back and see the big picture and how everything is coming together, and then use that to inform the tiny steps that we take rather than the other way around. Integrate rather than separate. Use small, slow solutions. Think in the long term, do small actions that over time lead to big change. It doesn't have to be one big grand gesture on day one and we've changed the world. That's not how nature works. That's not what the environment shows us to be true of how things work. So yeah, these are environmental principles, but they are also magical principles, especially if your religion, your path is about connecting with nature and the cycles that exist in nature all around us. So, and they're also just, great advice for human communities as well. Use and value diversity, value the marginal, the things that tend to get pushed to the side and thought of, if at all, as afterthoughts or thought of as not valuable. The marginal is a term that a lot of people are using more and more these days, and you may have even heard it in relation to magic, depending on the types of people doing magic that you may follow online or the type of books that you may read, right? It's talking about the marginal. And then that last one, creatively use and respond to change. That's just great. So those are really the main things I wanted to share with you about permaculture specifically, and I will put links in the description to a couple of pages where you can learn more about it, including that Wikipedia page that I just quoted, and also one of the pages on Starhawk's website that links to a bunch more resources where she has written about permaculture, links to her trainings, stuff like that. So the second question, what ecosystems and climate do we live in? How does this influence our path? How might someone incorporate their local environment into their practice? I actually had forgotten that this was even part of the topic this week until today, because I was just concentrating on reading more about the permaculture aspect of it to see what I really wanted to share. And so today I saw this part of the topic and I was like, oh, I forgot this was here, but it's really a fun thing to talk about, I think. So I don't remember, off the top of my head, the scientific name or the appropriate designation for the climate that I live in or the biome or anything like that. But I live in Northeast Ohio. I have lived here as a home base my entire life, although I have been in sort of other areas. It's always pretty much been Northeast Ohio. Definitely Ohio. We experience all 4 seasons here, which definitely affects my practice because I find that, first of all, seasonal observation of nature in general is very central to my practice and always has been. So I do something every season that I simply just call it seasonal observation. So if I'm not necessarily doing a big ritual, I will always do some kind of recognition of the change of season, and I usually go out and take a walk, journal about what's going on in my environment, or even if I don't journal about it, I just go out and walk and see what's going on, and I call that my seasonal observation. And sometimes I turn that into a ritual in itself. So we experience all 4 seasons. That plays a role in my practice. I tend to value the solstices and equinoxes pretty highly because they are waypoints along the solar year. And we consider them to be times when we change the seasons, right? They're the times on the printed wall calendars that say first day of spring, first day of summer. Even though we might not actually feel here in Northeast Ohio that the season has really come in and come in fully until those other 4 of the 8 Sabbats that are known as the fire festivals. So, February 1st, November 1st, August 1st, May 1st. I kind of went backwards around the wheel there, but you know what I mean. Those 4, which you may know as Imbolc, Beltane, Lunasa, or Lunasa, or Lammas, and Samhain. In Northeast Ohio, those are really the points where it finally feels like we're really in the depth of that season and everything that comes with being in that season. We've got the weather, we've got the quality of the air, we've got whatever the plants are doing, we've got whatever the animals are doing. Like, it's happening by the time we get to those periods of the year. And then the solstices and equinoxes, those are considered the beginning of the season, but here, those are very much transitional times. So that's how I think of them in my practice, and that is very much based on the fact that I live in Ohio, because in other areas, a little further south, a little further east, a little further west, I have friends all over the country and all over the world, thanks to YouTube and other things on the internet. So I know that elsewhere, people experience more actual springtime before we do here in Ohio. And so if I lived somewhere else, I feel like the times at which I do my seasonal observations, the times at which I truly feel like that season has come in, would be different. So there's that. It's also tends to be a little bit colder here. I have lived now close to Lake Erie and further away from Lake Erie throughout my life, and there's a large difference in just those 2 different things, like living an hour apart, depending on how close you are to the lake, whether or not you get that lake effect snow dumped on you, or if it flies right over you. So the winters can be very different depending on what area you live in around here, and we're not that far apart, and yet we're experiencing very different weather from each other. There was something this past winter here that people were calling the polar vortex, that it was unsafe to be outdoors at all. So pagan community group gatherings that we had planned over the winter had to be canceled because people were advised not to leave their homes, things like that. Our cars dying because of the extreme cold, the batteries, can't run, things like that. So we definitely have extreme cold, which affects things that I do and the way that I practice. So like, I can't go out to a meeting, or I can't do my working outside in certain weather, although I do love to be outside as much as possible. It gets hot here over the summer, but it's also very humid, so that affects things. And then just like proximity to specific things in nature. Like I mentioned, I have lived close to Lake Erie throughout some of my life. Even when I don't live close, I have always been able to drive up to Lake Erie and go to one of the several parks that have beaches right on the lake. And so I've actually had like field trips that were involved with school. Actually, I think more in college we went and we had trips to Lake Erie to observe what was going on in nature there. And so I have the ability to visit a body of water. I've actually always lived fairly close to a body of water, if not the Great Lake. I've always lived close to a lake of some kind. There are lots of lakes in my area. I've always lived in a fairly wooded area, and I feel like that very much affects my practice. I have always felt the most comfortable in the woods. I grew up in the woods, no nearby next door neighbors, basically just like my family on a hill in the middle of the woods. And that is still where I feel the most comfortable, where I feel the most connected to the universe and what it is that I consider divine. My mom lives in the desert. And so when I have been out to where she lives, which actually hasn't been in a very, very, very long time, but when I have spent some time in the desert, it's a very different ecosystem. And it's different to connect to a desert environment than it is to connect to a forest environment, than it is to connect to a beachside shoreline environment. And so I really feel like I focus on a balance between all the elements in my practice. That's very important to me. And there are different places where we can feel one or more of the elements more, but it's important to me, no matter where I am, to find my connection with all of those, but feel how different it is. And so this leads into the last part of the question for me: how might someone incorporate their local environment into their practice? You may have heard people talk about the concept of spirits of place and local spirits, nature spirits, things like that, that when you go into a new place, you are in the realm of completely different natural spirits. When you're in a forest, you have the trees, you have the plants that are intrinsic to that area, you have the animal life that are native to that area, that live in that area, make their homes there. And then when you're in the desert, you have very different animal life, very different insect life, very different plant life, very different feel of the air, dry air versus very humid air. My partner lived in the rainforest for a year, years ago, which is something that I would love to experience. I've also talked multiple times on here before about how I would love to live in the southern hemisphere for a year and experience what that is like, because the seasons are opposite of how we experience them in the northern hemisphere, which changes the seasonal festivals of the year. They're not attached to the calendar date on the man-made calendar. They're about the seasons. And so I think it would be really interesting and beneficial to experience them on both sides of the equator. So things like that, how people can incorporate their environment into their practice. Number one, I say, go out. And so again, number one, principle of design of permaculture: observe and interact. Get out there, see what's going on in your environment, see what it's like. Utilize the area that you have. If you live close to the water, maybe you want to spend some time meditating close to the water, meditating on water, the element, the physical thing, what we can learn from it. If you're in the forest, same thing. If you're in the desert, if you're in the mountains, if you live in fields and hills and valleys, anywhere you are, there's a lesson there. There are multiple lessons there. There are different spirits of place who live there, and it'll feel very different. Whenever you travel to a different state, how does that feel different on an energetic level, on an environmental level? So you can work on visiting different places and feeling into how they are different. But even if you never go anywhere else, just where you are, feel into that. And something that I personally have been starting to do more in the past year or so, and I talked about it a lot last year, was learning more about the plants that are native to your area. Or if they're not native to your area, the things that were introduced previously by different people, but that are now naturalized in your area and that grow wild there. So last year I was doing a lot of work with that, and just going around and seeing, what plants was I brought up being taught the names of? What are the names that I know for these plants? And in other areas of the world, it might be the same plant but called something else, or they might have a different species of it because their climate is different. What are the plants that I've seen my whole life but I don't know their names, and trying to learn their names, get to know them, introduce myself to them, and then learning, what are they for? Do they have a medicinal use, or are they poisonous? Should we never touch them, never consume them? Things like that. I grow chamomile for my tea. I grow mint for my tea. Growing as many as possible of your own plants that you will work with, whether it be herbs for cooking with, or for magical use for burning, vegetables, things that you will actually then eat, fruit, vegetables, things like that. Yeah, learning about the plants that already exist naturally in your area and finding out, what is actually native here versus was naturalized here. Most of the common herbs that I work with and that I have always worked with in my magic and that I've used in tea and things like that, most of them were native to Europe and were brought here with the colonists and did not originally belong here, right? They didn't come from here, but now they are naturalized here, and now they grow wild in some places here because they have been so integrated into the ecosystem here. And when you think about it, that's also me, because my ancestry comes from Europe most recently, of course, far enough back, whole other story. But at least a few generations back, my ancestors came from Europe, and now we live here, and I was born here. So similar to many of the herbs that I use. Some of the plants that I use that I grew up knowing how to identify, and then I have since looked up their magical properties and incorporated them more into my practice, some of them are actually native to this area, and I find that very interesting to know. And so that's something that I highly recommend as far as bringing your local environment into your practice, learning about the plants and animals that are native to your area, learning about their behavior, learning about their lives, and how our lives are mirrors of one another, and what they can teach us, and honoring them, honoring the spirits of the place as well. And whether that's just through observation and taking care of your environment and not destroying it, whether that's actually going out and having an altar to these spirits that you give offerings to. And if you don't like the word spirits, I also just mean the energy of the place, whether you actually want to give offerings to the energy of that place and show your respect for it, show that you would like to be a positive part of it, of this area, that you're not just here to take and destroy, but that you actually would like to be part of the system in place. That's what permaculture is about too. So highly recommend that. It's been very rewarding for me. In addition, just things like I have always done a lot of impromptu rituals out in nature where I might just go for a walk and, see some plants along the way and pick a couple flowers, never the whole plant, never all of the blossoms on it. No, some of them might be very important for pollinators and things like that, and you also don't want to kill the plant, but picking one little flower from one plant, another and another, just all as I'm walking. I might get like 3 little flowers and then go to a place, be it a special tree that I have developed a relationship with or a body of water, anything like that, and I might do a little impromptu ritual using those flowers and offering them to the body of water or offering them to the tree or whatever it might be. Or it might be picking up rocks and pebbles along the way and offering those, which actually might be better if you don't want to pick plants at all. So things like that, I think, are very simple ways to start incorporating your environment into your practice. Just literally look around, what is available to you, what beautiful natural areas are around you, and whether that's a spot in your backyard, whether that's a balcony in an apartment where you can see the sky unfettered, if it's a local park that you can easily get to and spend some time sitting on a bench, if it's spending time communing with non-human animal family members who may live with you, our fur babies, our fur friends, scale friends, feather friends. We're all part of the natural world, and just remembering that as well, that we should, as much as possible, try to be part of it, not be separate from it, not be, lording over it, but really trying to be part of it and part of that cycle. And remembering that we are one of many, 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 many beings on this planet, and we all live here. And number one core tenet of permaculture: first, care for the earth. Those are my thoughts this week. Thank you so much for watching another half-hour video. It means so much to me that you listen to all my words, if in fact you do. And if you don't, the analytics tell me. The analytics tell me how many of you click away and at what point. So I know that not all of you watch to this point. If you are one of the people who watch all the way to this point, thank you so much. Extra love to you, but love to all of you for tuning in. Love to all of you for hanging out with Pagan Perspective for 10 years almost now, or any amount of time. If you've just joined us, thank you so much. Welcome. I will see you next week. Until then, let us know your thoughts on this week's topic in the comments of any of our videos this week. Not just my videos, but everyone else's this week as well. And until then, I'll see you next time. Blessed be. Don't forget to be awesome. And goodbye.